All right, so today you have to endure me yet again, this time on a different topic. And this is only the second time I teach this component, so I'm a little bit less well versed in it, which also means it's a little bit more. I'm, I have not yet been able to bring it up to a level where it is as much of a conversation as the design topic, so you probably hear me a little bit more talking in this section, but I'm trying. So, we're dealing with the beast by many names. Call it human factors, call it usability, call it user experience, use it. I mean, there's quite a few different names for this. This is the most old-fashioned one, I think, as I can tell, because again, this problem of making something work for people is much older than computers. So already, in history, people for ages have been trying to create tools that, are useful for people, right? So, and human factors is the one that, is the most traditional one. So we're going to have a little bit of similar things. So we're going to have lectures, we're going to have discussions, we're going to have project work. And everything goes for Learn again. And we're trying to shoot for two little projects. But it's not going to be 6 weeks, it's going to be 2 times 4 weeks, so I still have to kind of modify it to squeeze it in. Also, the information I gave you yesterday on Monday about it's going to be 4 weeks lectures in the beginning, that was incorrect. So if you're going to Learn, actually I sat down and made a schedule for all the lectures for 602. So that is now up to date. Including what I have to do also every semester is I have to change the submission deadlines for all the assignments. So I've done that for the first, I think, 2 or 3 weeks. But if you go later on, the submission deadlines will be like still 2016, which is of course impossible for you. So not everything is up to date, but we're getting there. So I can guarantee for this week, and it's up to date. Right. One thing you should be aware about is that for the text submissions, Turnitin is activated, which is an online plagiarism tool. So please don't copy from Wikipedia. And if you do want to, you just brought the issue up. If you want to cite something, it's perfectly fine, but then you have to set a proper citation.
Which format should we use if we need to?
Doesn't matter so much. The stereotypical one would be APA. So, has any of you ever used proper citations?
APA referencing I have, but not through a referencing tool.
So you've done it through Word or?
Yeah, just basic referencing.
Yeah.
I tried using one of the reference managers and I thought Word was easier.
Yeah. So we'll potentially would get that. So in the thesis week, which is the 3rd week now, on Learn you will see a lecture that I have given on the topics of an efficient writing process, and that also touches upon citation management. Unfortunately, in that week I'll be in Europe, so I will not be able to, be in front of you and tell you all of those things. But please watch the video. It will help you a lot. My recommendation is the university here, University of Canterbury, has got a site license for a software called EndNote. And that's currently the market leader, I guess, amongst the commercial software. There's a couple of open and free tools like Mendeley or Zotero. You can also use those if you prefer, but the important thing is you use one, because the Word one, yes, it exists and it does somewhat work, but it is very limiting. So don't bother with Word. Get EndNote. You can download it for free from the website, so from your UC website. Anyway, We've been really good already, you guys, with the no screen policy. So this is all about us having a conversation as much as possible. And I need to use the screen because I have to remind myself what to talk about. But for you, that's not the case. And I see you taking notes, which is great. The PDF file of this presentation is already, again, up on Learn, so you don't have to actually copy it. But of course, you're free to make notes about what you think is important or things you agree or disagree with. This assignment also has, which is kind of an interesting one. So I was always struggling, getting good books for design that teach you how to do good design. It's really, really hard. But for this, it's much easier. There's so many books out there that can talk about usability testing. It's really more of a problem of selecting an appropriate one. So I did not find the single one book that is best for us. So instead, I take different chapters out of different books. They are also referenced in Learn. And also some of these books are available as an ebook through Learn. So the University of Canterbury is subscribed to certain services that allow you actually to look at these books online, and you can even download PDF files or some sort of other reader format. So please have a look at the links that are provided in Learn. Some of these books are also available as actual books in the library, so I linked them as well, but there's a problem with that there's not enough copies available. So either you have to be really fast. So if I see you dashing off right after this lecture, I know what's going on.
Do they have book scanners in the library?
Yeah, there are some in the lobby.
I'm not sure if there's specific book scanners. I mean, they've got scanners, yes, but not specific book scanners. So yes, the University of Canterbury has increased its policy, or it's more tighter on its policy about using copyrighted material. So the only thing that I'm allowed to do is what I did, the links that I provided. So I cannot easily just give you a PDF file. That is unfortunately something I can't do. So, but right now we're young creative people, so if you find other solutions, then that is up to you then. So there will be chapters out of all of these books, and of course, but this is not where it stops. There's actually some other books that are not on the reading list in terms of you must read it, but I think that these books are very important, and if you just want to progress your general education, then please do read them. So Don Norman's Design of Everyday Things, it's a classic on the topic, and he's written many books since then, but this is kind of the classical book that started all things off. Information Architecture for the World Wide Web is still a very good book about how to structure information so it's useful for the web, and not just for the web, actually in general. So that is something quite important. And Bad Science is just a very good book about an introduction, a very interesting introduction to how science works and how it doesn't work. Not related directly to human-computer interaction, but on a more general level, like how do we do science? And it's just a fascinating read, really. I can highly recommend it. Also very entertaining. I think I referenced actually a video of Ben Goldacre on the Learn website. It's a YouTube video. So if you want to get a gist of what he's talking about, go for that. I've also put some other videos of kind of keynote lectures of some very important people in the HCI community. So if you want to watch a nice educational video, then have a look at those. All right. So far, so good? Okay. So, we start here. Christchurch Airport. So, I'm not sure if you noticed, but we're completely moving towards a society of self-service. So where, there used to be a desk and a counter and a person you talk to who would, interact with you and do things for you. And this is more and more being pushed away. And they're bringing up these kiosks everywhere to save on, costs for personnel. And now we actually do all the work by ourselves. So instead of them providing us a service, we actually do the work for them, or expected to do the work for them. And it's not just at the airport. I mean, you have it also at the supermarket, where you do the whole checkout procedure yourself, right? So you do the work for them.
At Pack and Save, it's mostly cursing. It's the worst subject ever.
Well, interestingly, Pack and Save, they make it as an argument like, we don't pack your goods for you, and therefore we can offer cheaper prices, right? So they turn it into a feature.
Their self-checkout in particular, though, it's like, unexpected item, no, take it out, no, put it back, no, take it, make it compliant.
Yeah, so this is where it gets really, really important to get it right? If you make something, or if you do something wrong with this guy, it's going to cause so much frustration with the customers. It's going to cost you actually money. So the people who will not return to the store because they're fed up dealing with this particular machine is going to cost you money. So therefore, getting it right is not just a nice thing, it is also a profitable thing. So, if you want to make money, if you want to sell things online, you better make sure your website works, because if it doesn't, people are not going to buy it from you. And of course, in the web, it's even more problematic because your competitors are just one click away. Right? With these kind of stores, you still have to get out, you have to move somewhere else, maybe drive the car, it's effort, right? But with the web, everything is close by, so it becomes even more important. Yeah, so we deal more and more with technology. We're forced to. At some point, we also surrender. So it's getting scary. So I almost enjoy these days, like standing in a waiting area and not taking my phone out. And I just like to observe people these days, because you can literally stare at people these days and it doesn't matter anymore. Like it used to be like, okay, don't stare at people, don't stare at people. But now everybody's so much focused just looking down that nobody pays attention to you anymore. So, where is your mobile phone during the night?
Next to me so it can wake me up in the morning.
Right next to you?
Yeah.
Is it actually in your bed? Next to your bed?
The iPad's in the bed, the phone's next to the bed.
Okay.
Yeah, it's side table.
Side table? Table? Yeah, so I've got this hypothesis that we spend more time touching our phones than touching our partners. And think about how close this technology has become to our daily lives, and how much accustomed it is, and how concerned we are. It's like, oh, I forgot my phone at home, I have to come back. No, you don't, you can just leave. It's really amazing. And so who's seen the movie Her? One only? Okay, for the both of you, that's a must-see movie. I'm usually not much into romantic movies. This is a romantic movie about this fellow who falls in love with his mobile phone, which is in his pocket over there, and which has a new artificial intelligence, and it talks to him, and they form a relationship, and they literally fall in love. And so that really changes the relationship about how we relate to technology. So it's a very, very interesting near future movie. Very, very interesting. But of course it doesn't happen all the time. So, occasionally we get this one. And what I liked about this one is that this word alone, glass hole, in a way killed it. So Google Glass was a good start, you know, and an interesting piece of technology, but people felt quite uncomfortable that other people would wear it because they were concerned at all times, oh, I'm being filmed. You're spying on me, right? And therefore this term, glasshole, and that killed it. You know, socially not acceptable. So it is socially acceptable to stare at your phone, you know, and you know a little bit less pointing it at other people. But of course, the trick is, you know, when you want to film somebody, it's like you just do that, you know. So just don't look where you film, and people will not realize you're filming them, and they, you know, act reasonably normal.
Shoot from the hip.
Exactly. That used to be it. Yeah.
Actually, on that note, I was watching Breakfast this morning, that show, and they've released the Snapchat glasses.
Oh yeah.
So that's going to take that to the next level, I think, because they also probably look more socially acceptable to be wearing sunglasses than something that looks like it's obviously filming. I don't know.
Hard to say how it will go, huh? So people in general don't like to be observed because obviously, you know, it might be an intrusion of privacy. It might also feel like, you know, you're being put on the spot. It might also feel that you're under pressure, or you're being like, you know, oh, he's documenting my behavior. So it's not easy, and it's a gray zone right now to a large degree, because if you sit in the tram and you got glasses on, it films everything. Are you allowed to do that? I mean, that's really unclear.
There's CCTV already doing it in the bus and everything.
Yeah, okay. But for example, in photography, for example, if you are standing on Christchurch Central Square and you take a picture and there are people in the picture, that is okay. You do not have to go out and ask all of these people, may I please take a picture? But if I walk up to you and I do this, you have all the right to say, wait a minute, you took a picture of me, you know, I didn't give you permission, you know, so, you know, hand me over the camera.
The government doesn't need permission.
Yeah, so it's an interesting area where society still needs to find a consent on about what is socially acceptable and what is not. So let's have some fun. So one of the biggest techniques that is being almost often used in usability studies is something called thinking aloud. And the problem is, like, when you what you do is that you want to essentially understand that if people perform a task and they run into trouble, let's say they're in a checkout, right, and they scan something, it doesn't work, you know, and they repeat something, like, it's not always obvious about what's going on, you know. Why is the person doing that? What does the person currently think? What is the motivation about why that behavior is currently happening, right? So one of the techniques that's being used is called thinking aloud. So where you essentially sit down with a user and you ask the user to speak out all the thoughts that he or she has in his mind or her mind while performing the task, right? So we're gonna try this now. So yeah, well, I'm not sure if this is the best selection. May I have a look at this one? I'm not too sure. You might have a good one. Let's have a look.
Other end.
Okay, let's try that. Let's try this one, maybe. I'm not sure which one we want to take. So the task that you guys are going to do is that you'll be the participant, and your task will be to disassemble that pen into all of its components, and while you do it, you speak out everything that comes to your mind. You just blur it out, right? And the two of you take notes, and you observe. You don't interfere, you don't explain, you do not help, you just observe, right? And notice any kind of problems that arise might encounter. Okay? Off you go.
So I'm gonna like unscrew the back of it and then take the little tube thing out, pull out the eraser, and then I think you're gonna turn it over to get the lead out. I was gonna pull it out, but I don't think I can pull this bit out. Bit that I was using. If I can't unscrew it, I don't think I can unscrew it. It's like just the spring, I think it's stuck on there. So I don't know if I can get this bit out. And then I can take off the little silver pointy part, unscrews. And then a little lead holder just pops out. And then you can slide off the grip part. You can just slide it up. And then it's just that. I think the bulk of it, I don't think I can take apart without breaking it. The tube and the spring and the lead, I don't think I can. See if I can. I can't click it anymore because it's not in the holder. So I think that's as far as I can get. I can't get that last little piece of lead out.
Okay. So, did you observe any issues?
Try pushing the part that holds the first lead down, then release the lead
Like the,
down.
it doesn't click unless it's in the case, I think.
Yeah, hold like that and push the lead.
Or break a lead.
You won't break it. I haven't got enough fingers. I think it may only work when it's in this and screwed in, so it has something to click down against. So I probably should have taken the first piece of lead out first.
Zoe, did you observe any issues?
Well, interesting that you said that, Recyc. I guess the process in not knowing which step to take first as well, or is that kind of a part of it, like the obviousness of which function to perform first?
So the question is there a right sequence? Or is there, an optimal sequence? Right? I don't know. I mean, I don't know this pen, so couldn't tell.
We now field stripped mechanics.
Maybe there's a more efficient way of doing it. I don't know. But this could potentially be an issue, right? And less if like, this is something you do once a week. If you have to assemble 1 million of those,
that's
every second you save is worth it.
And then obviously at the end there was a break point where it didn't seem obvious which direction to take without damaging the product itself. So technically you can't perform disassembling it fully. Yes.
Yeah. So there's actually a risk, right? So there's a risk of actually causing damage. And what you do not want, of course, is that if your customer disassembles the product, that it becomes immediately broken, right? So if you ever try to repair your own computer, like particularly Apple Macintosh computer recently, it has become incredibly hard to repair a Mac without breaking it.
Mine broke last night. This is really tightly fitting. Both of my Apple products are currently broken, so it's good.
So the no screen policy works for you?
Yeah, so I might be getting expert help.
I used to fix mobile phones back home.
Yeah?
Yeah. The iPhone 5S, the little cable that attaches the fingerprint sensor to the main board has this little latch that will inevitably, when you open it, go flying about 1 meter in any direction.
You've got a lot of interesting jobs. Well, anyway, I mean, these days we use a lot of glue. So recently when I actually upgraded my iMac, it's still one of the old ones, and the screen was kept in place by magnets. So that was pretty awesome. You can actually suck it and pull the screen off. These days it's glued. It's horrible. Anyway. So that was level 1. Now let's go to level 2000. And we've got an engineer here. Fun. You know about technology, don't you?
A little bit.
A little bit. You've got a degree in computer science, right?
No.
Getting nervous? Okay. Set the right time and put an alarm on for 8 a.m.
Without turning it on.
Well, obviously you would have to turn it on.
Just triple check.
Power's over there. So if you want to, you can sit over there if you want to. And you think aloud.
Think about it.
See the problem? He was looking at it, but he wasn't talking. So you don't know what's going on in his mind.
I'm figuring
Right?
out where the timer setting alarm is. So I click this first button that I see. It doesn't do anything, so I'll move on to the volume up button. It doesn't do anything. It sets the alarms. So I'll just change the memory scan. It says 24 hours, so that's okay. Then I'll click the CH plus, which apparently does nothing. I click the band 12 by 24, which doesn't do anything either. So I'll click the power button. That is nothing. So I'll click the volume down. Nothing again. The snooze button, nothing. Doesn't do anything, which it says 24 hours. 1, okay. I'm clicking channel plus, nothing happens. Okay, I figured out we have to click memory to set the alarm. Okay, so I'm clicking volume up and down, nothing happens. Let's say something when I'm clicking tune minus volume. Let's go in minutes. We have to set an alarm for 8
a.m.
I'm pressing the tune minus plus, so it's 54, 6%, 90 seconds. It's time. I press the snooze and the sound goes. I'm clicking memory again, it says 24 hours. Nothing's happening. I click some channel minus, nothing's happening. I click tune plus and nothing's happening. Tune minus, nothing's happening. I click memory again. I'm figuring out which one to click. Let me see. I'm thinking which one would do. Clicking memory. I'm clicking and holding it. Nothing again. I'm clicking channel minus. Nothing again. I'm clicking volume plus. Okay. I'm clicking tune plus bar power. Okay, it set power. 8 and I'm clicking tune. Okay, I figured it out. I'm clicking tune minus to set as 0. It's very good and even 4%. So it's 8. I think it's 8. So
That's the alarm?
I think so.
Or is it the time?
I'm thinking how to know the difference. If it's an alarm or the time. I think it's.
So you should set it to the current time, huh?
It's. I'm doing the thing again.
So what's the time right now? You put a watch in?
Yep. 10:32. Okay, I'm clicking tune minus so that it will push. So I'm clicking alarm on set, and then I also set the time as 8. So what's the time? 10:32. Okay. 10, 30 around, holding in tune minus so that it reaches 10, 30, and 32. I think we are done. So alarm 1 is set to 8. Time is 10:32.
Wow.
Okay.
Good. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's okay to keep it. It's all right. Very good. So, what do you think?
That it had to take a process of elimination and manual testing to ascertain which logic was like basically the logic didn't appear evident, like self-evident. A lot of manual exploration.
The buttons were badly labeled because there's no reason tune should set the time. Yeah. And also it required a lot of effort to perform a simple task like keep pressing just to advance, like every time you want to advance, just keep press or you have to hold it.
So a lot of physical input was required to do what should be part of the task.
Plus it wasn't clear what was even going on, from whether it was setting an alarm or to set the time. Like it didn't provide the feedback for what you were doing in a clear way.
It's amazing, huh? I mean, it's not that difficult to set the time in principle, right? If you go for like a really old watch, you just turn the wheel, it changes the time. I mean, it's so easy, right? And you've been struggling now for 5 minutes, right?
We don't know it's 5 minutes because the clock couldn't move. The clock
Okay, but so do you think this is a good product?
No. And no digital clock is. I've never met a digital clock that was not infuriating, unless it was like on the phone.
So you see, that is a usability problem, right? So this is the instruction sheet, and when I read the instruction sheet, it didn't really help me that much either. It's amazing how bad it can be. So usability is actually, there's even an ISO norm for it. And ISO 9241, ergonomics of human-system interaction, and these are the components of it. This is kind of like the official story. And the reason why I bring this up is that if something goes up to be an ISO standard, that it means, it has a certain traction to it, and it also has a certain importance to it. So, if your client, can claim that, it's complying to an ISO norm 9241, that looks pretty good, right? But I also want to draw your attention to one thing in there, which is called satisfaction. But maybe we should start from the top. So usefulness. Usefulness is usually defined it allows the user to complete the task that the user actually wants to. Effectiveness, it allows the user to do the right thing in terms of task completion, doing the right thing. Efficiency, doing things right? You do it the right way, efficiently. Learnability is, of course, how quickly do you learn to use the system, right? And that even goes up to the level, not just at the beginner's level, but also, for example, that for expert users, you have sort of like almost an expert mode where you can start to use shortcuts and make things more efficient, right? So learnability is beyond the first 5 minutes. Satisfaction, happiness with the system. Very interesting term. And accessibility, of course, goes very much into the direction of making it useful for everybody, including people with certain disabilities or constraints. So Zoe, you're a lucky one today. I brought this one. And we're going to do Thinking Loud again. So now it's your turn. Oh, did I do something wrong? All right. So, put the clock on.
Is there a time I am setting this to? Sorry, is there a time that you want?
No, just put it on your arm. Think aloud.
Yeah, thinking how to take this out. There are instructions, which is helpful. Pulling the photo strip out. And it's quite flexible, so that's pulling out the vision component. That's not immediately obvious if there are any dials.
Just put it on your arm. That's enough.
Okay. It's quite stretchy, so it feels like it's easy to mould to the wrist. Though a little bit difficult when trying to get it under the straps.
All right.
Then not sure how to actually set it.
No, it's okay. So, how did that feel?
Probably more intuitive than some other packaging that I've dealt with, because it does provide instructions. It doesn't assume that you'll immediately be able to ascertain from packaging alone without additional kind of text cues and visual information how to get it out. In terms of the actual materiality, it feels nice to the touch, in that it's flexible and everything.
If somebody would give this to you as a present, you would open it. How would you feel?
Well, I would feel, without the ability to set it, I would feel if it was set to the wrong time, that would be an issue. But,
No, I mean just the process of opening this package.
Well, it's quite a smooth transition. It feels like you're getting something of quality by the way that the packaging is constructed. It's probably more like a jewellery box, but a modern version. The way that the box works.
You see the difference? Here, the designers paid a lot of attention for just 1 minute. I mean, you're not going to put it back in there, probably, right? But the experience of opening this package is so well designed. So much attention has been paid to it, to making it give you the feeling that this is something of value, right? And you could do it much simpler. You could put it in a plastic bag. You could wrap it up in bubble wrap, and there are much easier ways to package this. Think about it. They've got a magnet in there, right? They've got a little notch here for you that indicates, give you an affordance of, pull here, right? Otherwise, they don't know. Oh, where does it go? Oh, here's something to pull on, right? And this one's a little bit less obvious as you flip it. But then look here. You even have a little thing over here to carry.
Yeah.
Instructions on
It's
there.
just a really simple infographic element, yeah.
Right? Currently, when you buy an Apple product, and the first thing usually when you open it up, it says designed by Apple in California, right? It doesn't say when it was built, but it's designed by Apple in California.
Yeah, even the way that you put, they structure the internal packaging of how the keyboard works and how that's slotted in. That's all so well considered. That definitely becomes part of the initial excitement of using the
I've just sort of gotten old that box. I store stuff in it.
Yeah. Well, it's a good box,
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with it, But
I've used it to ship internationally several times now, so it's
so we see the gradient of, getting things really right and getting things really wrong. Right? And your task, of course, is to get it right. And the funny thing is that usability as a concept is only ever visible when it's absent, right? When it is useful and intuitive, you don't notice it, you don't even think about it, it just works. But when it's not there, that's when you start to notice it, right? So you notice the absence of it, but you don't notice the presence of it. So it's quite an interesting take. So let's talk about computers. Because, well, I mean, the lab here, of course, does deal a lot with modern technology. Modern technology very often involves computers. I mean, usability is everything. It's packaging. It is an alarm clock. It is the checkout counter. It is a lot of things. It is actually even the design of a pen is usability, right? So you can go very wide in terms of how you do it. We here will probably focus more on something that will include a computer or a form of microprocessor. So, 1946. Can you imagine how people interacted with computers at that time?
Punch cards.
So what would they do?
I think you put them in slots. And you programmed it by poking holes in it.
Oh, that comes later.
Was that before that?
Mm-hmm. So how would people interact with this?
Turn the knobs, dials.
I think plugged and unplugged the cables.
Yes. Plugging in cables. And how would they read out information?
Lights.
Yes. Some light bulbs would switch on. Now think about it. What kind of interaction? Try to send an email that way. And also, this is like a secured hidden room operated by highly trained engineers only. Nobody else could use it. Nobody would understand it, right? Now, punch cards, what you just mentioned, right? 1957. So, how does this work?
Under the card, the way it was punched out determined the instructions it sent to the machine.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, I don't really know.
So there were actually people whose job it was, they had a little puncher and they were literally punching holes in these cards. That is how the machine was programmed, right? A human punching holes into cards. And the output?
Still lights.
Still lights. Still light bulbs going on. And of course, from the right, you see that, of course, the punch cards could also be on a roll, right? So it would be kind of transported in a bit quicker. 1957. IBM 711 card reader on an IBM 704 computer at NASA. 1961. This is an IBM Stretch 7030, 1961. So, what do we have? Switches.
Looks like the airplane cockpit from hell.
Well, the interesting thing about this particular computer is that it was the first transistor-based computer, which made things a lot smaller. other than that, it hasn't really progressed much more in terms of user interface. And the next one is going to be really, really interesting. I find it's fascinating. 1963.
Is that touchscreen?
Yes, in a way. This is Ivan Sutherland, and he's kind of the father of computer graphics. But what do you see in terms of input and output?
Earlier form of a keyboard.
There's buttons on a keyboard, yes, but more importantly,
Interface?
A screen.
a screen. And what is he holding in his hand?
Stylus.
Yes, a stylus kind of thing. So you could actually draw on the screen. It was a light pen in 1963. Not bad, huh? So who came up with this idea? So first of all, what is it?
It's a mouse.
It is a mouse. Potentially the first mouse ever. Anyone remembers who created it? His name was Douglas Engelbart, who came up with this idea. A button on top and two wheels in a wooden box. But of course, we're still quite a few years away from having useful computers. 1972, the Xerox Alto. So what do you see?
Keyboard and mouse.
Is there a CPU at the bottom?
Was that?
A CPU?
The computer is in the bottom under the table, right?
Guessing there's reels hold the data.
Yes.
Obviously a lot smaller, so it's more in the realm of like office professionals rather than just like engineers and data scientists and things.
Hmm.
And the screen is bigger.
Hmm.
Graphics is better.
Now, 1978. This is a VT100. The interesting thing about this one is that, and you probably not know this, that's what I was telling you, is that this is not actually a computer. This was just a terminal. This was the terminal to a computer, which is stored in a different place. So the idea of actually, having a powerful server and then dumb clients, is an old one. And interestingly, we're moving back that way. Because these days, we had a long phase of where you have a software installed on a computer and you do it locally. But now we're actually going back to, you do everything in the web browser. So everything, again, is on the server. And the only thing you need is the web browser. So the Chromebooks actually are an example of that, where, it's just a client, and everything important is actually on the server computer, right? 1981, the Xerox Star. So why is this famous or infamous?
There's something strange going on with that keyboard.
Applications. Useful applications. Like GUI.
Yes, there's a GUI. What does GUI stand for?
Graphical user interface.
Yes. So Xerox came up with the first graphical user interface. First time ever. And why is it infamous?
Didn't work very well.
Tell you how to market it.
Yeah. So, story is that Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak visited Xerox, the company, saw this, thought it was a brilliant idea. Xerox didn't proceed with it. Apple did. And Apple became successful as a computer manufacturer, and Xerox did not. They had it, and they didn't see its potential. So, in 1983, there we go, the Lisa. The first graphical user interface on a Mac. It's a bit earlier probably than what you thought. Huh?
What was the model called, sorry?
This is called the Lisa. So, yeah, so it's probably a little bit less known. I mean, like if you're an Apple fan, you of course know about this, but you know, it doesn't look like a normal one. What you probably associate with the first graphical user interface would be this one, right? This will be the Apple Macintosh that came out. And it had an operating system, which very much looks like Xerox style, doesn't it? I mean, once you get it, you know, it's all clear. Yeah, so there you have it, and Apple ran with it. And then, of course, does anybody remember the left one?
We had Palm Pilot.
Yes. What was the difference between Palm Pilot and this?
I remember you could write with your fingers on Palm Pilot. You could there's a stylus, but you could also.
Yeah. I used to own a Palm Pilot myself. I actually bought it in the US.
I'd steal my dad's every day on the way to school and play with it.
All right, but Palm Pilot was not the first in the market. It was actually Apple with the Apple Newton, it was called. And this could do pretty much everything an iPhone could do in 2007, except sending, I mean, it was not a phone. It had a modem, so you could actually dial in, you can surf the internet and check your email, but you could not use it as a telephone. But other than that, it was pretty much there already. The biggest difference between the Palm Pilot and this one is that the Palm Pilot was so much cheaper. I mean, this one was great. It actually had natural handwriting recognition. So with Palm Pilot, you actually had to learn an alphabet, you know. Well, with this one, you could write whichever way you feel natural and it would recognize it. Well, to be honest, it didn't really recognize it very well. And there was part of the problem. The idea was there, but it was not as useful. And that's the way I learned the Palm Pilot alphabet, because it was so much faster.
It's like shorthand.
Yeah. It was even faster than having a virtual keyboard and going woodpecker style, right? So, but the point being here is that, you know, there's always history. If you think, you know, iPhone was the original thing, no, it wasn't. You know, there was actually a lead up to that. You know, it just didn't came out of nothing. And unfortunately, you know, Apple, when it came out with the Newton, they were just too early. You know, it was too early for it. The idea was right, the concept was right, price was too high, you know. And then later on, of course, Palm Pilot was bought up by, who bought it? I'm not sure. It went through several hands and eventually died. So, what has changed?
Graphics.
User input style.
Usability.
Yeah.
Computing power.
True, yeah, of course.
And market.
Yeah.
Like the people who use the devices.
So who was using it now and who used to be using it back then?
Everyone uses it now pretty much, and it used to be just the military and academic.
So this machine would cost a fortune. So it would only be a very selective number of people who would own it. An Apple Macintosh, when it came out, I think it was 10K or so. It was ridiculously expensive.
Well, then now if you buy an unlocked iPhone, it's $3,000 or something.
So the prices come down. We use from experts to everybody. But also it has moved over from work, or even from military to work, to the home, right? So, what makes products less usable? So there's some typical problems that you encounter, and one of that is when something is developed and people just focus on the device and they don't consider the user, it's a recipe for disaster, right? And this is something that is particularly problematic with unfortunate engineers. I mean, engineers appreciate machines for other reasons sometimes than, the people on the street. So they might admire, its efficiency or whatever, which sometimes has no relevance to, the person actually using it. And the people who are using it actually have other demands and needs than the engineer considers important. And of course, when you are the engineer and you build this thing and you know how it works, the person who built this thing know how it works. And he would say, oh, it's obvious. You just push these buttons and it works. Right? Yeah, right. For you it's obvious, but not for everybody else. Right? And of course, with a bit of arrogance, engineers would say then like, oh, well then the user is too stupid and, they should read the manual. There's nothing wrong with the machine. It works perfectly. It is the most precise clock you will find in the market. Yeah, so I'm sorry, it's a bit of engineer bashing here. So the problem is that a lot of things are sometimes assumed as common sense. Well, it's obvious you should do this. And you should never underestimate the lack of common sense. I mean, you would be surprised how common sense is. It's really scary. So another problem is that, when you divide the team up. So what happens is like, okay, first the engineers build it, and then they give it to the designer and say, okay, you make it pretty, so that people will like it, and then you do a bit of testing, just to confirm how good our product is, and that's it, right? So that is a really bad idea. What you actually need to do is that you need to get in early. So the thing is that changing something in the product is very cheap early on. When you're in the conceptual phase of a product, making something different is easy and it has very little financial consequences. If you are, I guess, Samsung Galaxy Note 7, I think, when you leave the problem until the market introduction, you're going to pay a fortune on replacing those batteries.
And then didn't one of their own factories burn down because they were storing.
So the point is test early, test often, and that is what will help you identifying problems and change them while it is still cheap. And this is something that, it's when something is being developed, there are always different people with different interests. You'd have the engineers, you have the marketing people, you will have the managers, will be all kind of people who influence the process of the development of the software or hardware or whatever. And it's never quite easy. And your task will really be to advocate for the user. And you need to test these things early on. We just had, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but particularly, large projects are always problematic. We just look at our, in a city, the master plan of Christchurch. It's not easy to run big projects, it's always problematic. But IT projects in particular have a tendency to fail, and it grows with the size. And you might be familiar. What do you estimate is the failure rate of large IT projects? Yes. You have an estimate? So I think in the back of my mind, but I don't have the exact data, but I think it was around 70%. So 70% of the projects that are being started, that are large-scale IT projects, are being abandoned eventually. So just last week, the German ministry that runs the unemployment office, they had 14 different software tools they were using, and they wanted to combine that into one. And they had 6 years' time for this project, and they had a budget of 60 million euros. And last week they abandoned it. And they abandoned it after they tested it with users, and it turned out to be not useful. It's like there were some usability issues that were just ridiculous, and changing it would cost so much that they abandoned the whole project. 60 million euros, 6 years of development going down the drain. And this is by far University of Canterbury. They're using a software for student administration called, I think it's called Student Management System, SMS. It's run by a local company here called Jade. Jade stopped actually this product. It's not being sold anymore to anybody. But the university is struggling with and is unable with changing or adopting a new software. I mean, it still runs and the university still operates, but it's fallen behind dramatically in what ease of use and productivity and everything. But they can't make the switch. There was already one attempt where they even had a working group. They identified a new software product they would use. They were trying to implement it, roll it out, and then again they stopped. So, So the user-centered design process is usually like you run circles as often as you can until you run out of money or time. So you start out with, what it you should do, you do, and then in these phases you do different kind of activities. So in the very early phase, it's really about more like, well, what should this thing actually do, right? And then you run focus groups and you try to gather product requirements, and you maybe make some really early paper prototypes, just to kind of, well, that's really just the first phase, the conceptual phase. And then you go down to more detail, like how should it actually work? And then you start to make walkthroughs, expert reviews, usability testing. You make some early mock-ups, right? And then you actually go for building the real thing. And then you go up with benchmarking, and it becomes ever more quantitative, but also ever more precise. And then, of course, once you're done with it, you start all over again, because, of course, the current system is the best prototype you ever have. Right? And it doesn't happen so often that you go into a project where you start from scratch. Like you start and there's nothing there before. There's usually either competitors or there are a previous system that they used.
And how does Microsoft manage to get every other generation of its OS wrong? It's been going on since
It's a funny pattern, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's a funny pattern. Yeah.
I think they've struck out twice now, if you ask me, but...
Well, you haven't been long. I'm not sure which version you used, but if you go back to Windows XP was useful. Windows 2000 before that was, I think, Windows Vista was the problem. It's just
ME, there was like 98 was great, and then there was ME, which
yeah. Millennium Edition, yeah. But again, large-scale projects are notorious for being extremely difficult, and of course, if you build something like an operating system, there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of people involved, and it also becomes a large problem of coordinating people, right?
They just change it for change's sake, though, I think, in other cases.
Hard to tell. The wheel keeps on spinning, so new software requires new hardware requires new software, so it's a self-serving cycle in a way. But anyway, for the methods, so we have kind of what we call formative methods, or you can also call this qualitative methods, where the emphasis is not necessarily on running a scientific evidence for that this is actually the most efficient way, but what you really want is more, you want to have good ideas about, finding errors, finding ways of doing things better. It has a different focus, and this usually happens early on in the process. And then you've got summative methods, which are really then about where you start to quantify things, where you start to really measure things. If you have a paper prototype, it doesn't really make any sense to measure, for example, task completion time, because it depends on how quickly you can change the paper, so it doesn't really quite work. But later on, it will give you a lot of information. And then there are, of course, different types of prototypes that range from, very basic, literally just paper and pen, to using, almost actually already the code that the developers will use later on. And of course, you will always be confronted with, when you go out, people will tell, like, why do we need you? What are you doing here? What is your contribution to the team? Right? Because we got the important engineers, we got the marketing people who know what the users want. So why would we need anybody else? Right? So the way you would respond to this kind of challenge is that by informing the developers and designers, you essentially eliminate design problems and frustrations, ideally early on. And in the end of the day, it also increases profitability, right? And that is partly, if you stay at the company for a longer time, you can actually benchmark the versions of the software and can monitor the progress, so you know where you've been, you know what you've tried, and you know what works and doesn't work. You can increase sales by, people come back, right? They enjoyed this, opening this box, and they would recommend it to their fellows, or when they have a choice between supermarkets and they really hate the checkout machine for the one, well, they go for the other, right? And of course, if you've got feature parity, so in terms of it does really do the same thing, function-wise, then it really comes down, well, which one does feel better, right? So you give yourself an edge by making it useful. And of course, you minimize risks in all sorts of directions. So there's actually a book chapter that I'll ask you to read, which is the only book chapter out of the book Cost Justifying Usability. But essentially, you've got return of investments. And this is unfortunately the kind of language you need to use to justify why they should pay you money to work on it, right? Because the person who will pay you, that's what he's interested in. It's like, if I hire you and I spend X amount of $1,000 on it, what do I get back, right? And it's not always so obvious. Like, for example, that you've got decreased training costs for your staff, or that you, for example, can cut down on your call center because, people don't call in so often. Actually, as a matter of fact, there's this very nasty rumor that big organizations, like, for example, a university, hold on to Microsoft Windows because it requires support, right? Because the IT department get paid on the basis that they support people. Mm-hmm. If they would switch off or switch over to Macintosh, probably they could cut down half of the ICT staff because it doesn't require that much maintenance. And of course, that is not what ICT staff is interested in.
That's the reason I'm here, as opposed to still like corporate IT.
So there are competing interests, as always, right? And the people who provide the call center will say, like, yeah, but we've got the most efficient and best call center ever. We've got 100 staff working on it all the time. We manage 1,000 calls a day. Well, why is that? That's not a good thing. You should receive no calls at all. It should just be self-explanatory. You shouldn't need to have operate a call center to start with, right? And of course, there are benefits for inside, essentially, the organization, and to the outside, so that comes in as well. So, your task for next week is to select a product. So you will be conducting a usability test, right? And for now, your task is to simply select something that you will test. And motivate your choice, like why do you pick it? What you might expect without actually having conducted the test, but maybe you heard like, oh, this is supposed to be a good one, or this is supposed to be a bad one, or something. Maybe you've got some pre-recognition about what may or may not be the problem. So type this up into 500 words, put it to Learn. Read the book chapters that are put onto Learn, watch the video, and one more thing is You all have got mobile phones with cameras, right? So I want you, since you have it with you all the time anyway, I want you to go around and document usability horrors. So if you see something and you go like, gosh, why did they put that thing there? Take out your phone, take a picture of it, right? Document it, and you will be expected to upload 3 of them, and it's usually quite funny.
How do I convey in a single photograph the pack and save self-checkout kiosk? It's the only supermarket I can walk to. It's been grating on me for 2 weeks.
Well, yeah, that's a bit more complex problem. Sometimes it's more obvious. So recently I was in the Netherlands and I was in Amsterdam and I was in the Maritime Museum and I had to go to the bathroom. And there was a door and there was a knob or something, and I went in, I looked at it, it's like, okay, how do I lock it? And there was actually an instruction written on the door that explains you how to operate the door. And I was like, wow, if you have to print instructions on the door that tells you how to operate it, then definitely you failed. It should just be obvious, right? And it's these kind of things that you just look at it and you go like, wow. I used to have a remote control for a Philips television, and it had a button on it with no label, and it was a dead button. It didn't do anything. It was just there.
The level, do not press this button.
Yeah, that would be at least interesting. It would be fun, But no such thing. Although Philips in that year did come out with a remote control, which was brilliant. It was a very simple remote control, very cheap. It only had like channel up and down, volume up and down, on and off. But on the bottom side, it had a beer opener. And it was during the World Soccer Championship, so you could just... So brilliant, But anyway, so you will find this, I hope you'll find it. But the important point is, if you go through your environment, if you go through your day, it is important that you start paying attention to this. That you don't just accept it as, oh, that's just the way it is. No, you don't. You look at it and you go like, wow, this is pretty bad, or why is it this way?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
My house. You lock yourself in, and you have to have the key to unlock the door from the inside. So if there's a fire, basically I'll burn to death. Or climb out the windows.
That might even be a criminal.
Yeah.
I used to live in an apartment, and the doors were set up in a way that they would hit each other. So, and because there was, of course, a door handle, the door handle would slam always into the other door and leaving a mark and essentially breaking it, right? So you would always have these 2 doors smashing against each other. It's like, whoa!
I had to take out the bathroom door in my last flat and put up a curtain because you couldn't, if you opened the door, it opened in, and then you couldn't get to the sink. And you had to like shimmy around it to get it closed again.
Yeah, so there are sometimes some very obvious things, sometimes less obvious things. Anyway, the important thing is you pay attention to these things and your daily routine. Right? That's the reason I put this in. I want you to become sensitive to these issues.
So with the 500 words, are we actually conducting this experiment? Are we running how we would do a usability experiment? So
we will, in this time that we spent over in this week of this course segment of your program, we will actually conduct a usability study. Right? So originally my plan was to do 2. So the idea would be you run a study once, you observe problems, and then you improve it, you make it better. You create a prototype, essentially, of making it better. And then you run a second user study that compares it to the first, and you can show that you've improved it. Now, we're going to be using a software tool called Axure, which is a prototyping tool that allows you to quickly put together an interactive screen-based prototype.
How do you spell it?
Axure. A-X-U-R-E. Now, the thing about that is that you can see, essentially you can also built this in it, because you just take a photograph of it and then you make buttons and you make them clickable, and then you've got a TV over there that reacts to it. So you can actually use it for more than just software, right? You can also, but for example, in the previous time I ran this course segment, somebody did a usability test on snow chains. And that you cannot model in software because putting it around there is a physical task, right? That is valid. I mean, the usability of it is... Have you ever put on snow chains?
What's a snow chain?
What is a snow chain?
I'm from Florida.
Wonderful. Well, hopefully you don't need them in Christchurch. Usually it doesn't snow in Christchurch, you will not need it. But if you go up to the mountains, you need to put a snow chains on because of the snow. You put chains around the wheel so it has traction.
Of your car?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That sounds like it could be potentially very dangerous.
Yeah, so you don't slide on the ice.
Yeah, so actually they will actually, when you go over the mountains in the winter, when there's a lot of snow, they will actually stop you. It will be obligatory. If you don't have snow chains on, they will not allow you to progress because the roads up there are so dangerous that if you don't have snow chains on, you do not only endanger yourself, actually you will slip and slide and you take somebody else with you.
How do they stay on them?
Yeah, well, exactly. It is not easy, particularly, and he did it in the summer, where it's all nice and good.
Yeah.
But when I do it, it's like, okay, it's winter, it's snowy, it's cold, and I'm wearing gloves, which kind of makes it, again, much more complicated. Anyway, the point I'm bringing this up is that this time we have a little bit less time than previously, so we have to be a bit more efficient. So what I would recommend to you is do something that can be easily modeled with a screen-based system, right? So a stereotypical thing would be usability of a website. It's as boring as that, but that's something extremely easy. Or it could be the usability of an app on your phone. Very, very, very. These are low-hanging fruits, right? But anyway, that will allow you to do it later. I mean, the problem was like the guy with the snow chains, like he could do the usability test, the first one, but when it came to using the prototyping tool, now he had to start all over again, and doing something completely different, which was okay, but not as optimal. So if you can select something that can be modeled on the screen, it'll save us time.
So the first 500 words, that was just why we chose it, who we think the target audience is, and then what are the issues that could arise?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's going to inform the other two assignments?
Yes. So every week now I will ask you to do something, and all of this will be building blocks for your final report. So all of this is not wasted. So this will essentially be the introduction to your report on your usability study, right? So we don't leave report right until the very end. We do it every week. Questions?
In terms of text formatting, do you have a preference for single space, double space, font?
Okay, so the way Learn works, it'll just have a web-based text box.
Okay.
So you don't actually submit a file, you actually literally just copy and paste it into the text file.
Okay.
So plain text. Easy.
And this is due a week from today?
Yeah. Now, one more thing. Did you ever do any kind of usability testing in your education?
Not in my education, really. I have done like bits of it as part of teams post-university, but I don't really have a huge deal of experience in it.
Okay. So, usability testing is fundamentally based on the methodology that's being used in psychology. Right? Fundamentally, we're running a psychological test, really. And psychology has certain fundamental concepts. For example, having a control group, right? Or well, there's all kind of things that psychologists do in structuring tests, for example. And you will be probably rather unaware of it. And if there would be a psychologist here, it would be like really, really boring for that person. So anyway, I put up, I think, maybe 2 or 3 chapters out of a book. So if you do not have a psychology background, which in this case I guess would be all 3 of you, I would like you to read those. So I guess you have a good amount of reading to do. Yeah.
Grade 1 of them is not too bad though. It's like not super hard reading.
No, it's you don't have to even remember it. No, I mean it's not like we're not going to have a test or an exam that will check whether you actually read it, right? It's not going to be like this. I don't necessarily believe in that, repeating facts is a sign of that you've learned anything, right? So what shows me that you've learned something is that you are being able to do it, right? But this theoretical foundation will help you understand why we're doing this. For example, why do we need a control group? Any idea? And what is a control group?
It's the one where, like, if you're testing a prescription drug, like, they're the ones who are given placebo.
Pretty much, yeah. So, in our context, right, let's say you work for Trade Me, right? And you design a new function, or you modify something on the website, right? And then you do a usability test on it. And you use one of the, let's say, measurements, the SUS test, and you get a score of 60. Okay, and you can say, yay, I've got 60. But what does that mean, right? What does it mean? So what you need is, you need to compare this to something. You need to compare this to, let's say, the system before this was introduced, right? Or it was different. So you must essentially give either, the original system or an alternative system, and then you can check, well, now, the old system only gave us 53, and now we've got 60, so it's an improvement. You can put it into context, right? So that's, for example, why you have control groups. I mean, ultimately, the reason why in medicine control groups are so extremely important is because of the placebo effect. So actually, no, to be extremely precise, that's an interesting story. It goes even back to human factors. So what happened is that people were investigating in a big factory on how to improve production, right? So how could the workers on the ground perform better so they produce more goods faster and higher quality and so forth. So that they send in all the usability experts, and they were like, okay, I guess what, we need more light in here, right? So they put more light in there, and then they say, okay, maybe we should, provide different food, or we should do this or this. They came up with all these ideas, and every time they made a change, productivity rose. Great. But the problem is that one of the things I didn't consider is the fact only that people, that the workers felt that they're being listened to, that people paid attention to them, that they're suddenly focus of, consideration, that in itself already made them more productive. They were just working harder because of that. And if you do not have a control group, you miss out on that, right? You will not notice that, okay, because I'm doing, I'm testing this, people will already do it. So in an experiment, for example, people will always try to please the experimenter. Right? So if you build a new system and you do usability tests and say like, oh look, I built this new system, I'm testing it now, can you please tell me how good it is? The person will always say, oh, it's a great system, because he wants to make you happy, right? And you do not want that, because that's not what you're after, right? So anyway, so there are some psychological foundations that you need to be aware of, and these few book chapters will give you a quick introduction to that. So for now, a lot of reading for you.
So is it like Taylorism type stuff? The factory control groups and things? Is that part of the reading?
No, but it was just a good story, I hope. All right. Any questions? Then happy reading for now.